So I'm going to do that right now. And so thank you again, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Angela. So I'm going to present the first part of the presentation, and then I'll have Erica take over. So welcome everybody for attending today. So the intended outcomes for our presentation is we want you to understand the pathway to become a healthcare professional, which is pretty straightforward, and we'll go over all of those steps. Be introduced to the AAMC Core Competencies, describe how to develop and demonstrate these core competencies, and understand the basic requirements for your intended health profession. So the topics that we're going to be covering, so the pathway to becoming a physician, and like I said, it's pretty prescribed, and we'll talk about it. It's so prescribed in the sense of the pathway, but we'll talk about the different things like selecting of a major, the core competence for entering medical students, developing and demonstrating those core competencies. So we break it down by prerequisite courses, required testing, letters of reference, and experience. And the application process, which can be a little bit overwhelming, and then what's next. So pathway to becoming a physician. Like I said, it's pretty prescribed. So everybody typically has to have a high school diploma and graduate from a four-year college. And it can be from a CSU, UC, or private university. It just has to be an accredited university. So you can also be a college transfer to a four-year school. But as long as you have that college degree from a four-year institution, you're good. So professional school, which is the beginning part of becoming a physician. And that's both allopathic and osteopathic medicine, so MD and OD. And who's out there? Oh, so then dental, sorry, pharmacy, something popped up. I couldn't see it very well. So the professional school itself is just generally 4 years. Now, after that 4 years, and that's when you start getting into the residency and training, and you're allowed to become more specialized in certain areas. So we have a list of areas there, and it is anywhere from 3 to 5 years, depending on the specialization. And so we have emergency medicine, family and community medicine, internal medicine, obstetrics and gynecology, pediatrics, psychiatry, and surgery. Now, the optional fellowship, which is 1 to 3 more additional years, would be a little bit even more specialized. So you can become a surgeon, but then this is when you can actually become a cardiothoracic surgeon. You can become wilderness, I can't speak today, trauma, gastroenterology, child psychiatry, which is again, it's a psychiatrist, but it's an opposite set, and it's even more specialization, and then surgical and critical care. Then after all of that schooling, so depending on which part of the profession you go into, then become a practicing professional. And then with any health profession, but really any profession, there's the continuing education component. So in order to keep up your licensure, you do have to have some continuing education and some training. So one of the big things, and if you take anything from today's presentation, one of the big things is to know that there is no specific pre-med major. So we have a lot of students that say, oh, I want to be pre-med. Well, you can be pre-med, but a psych major. You can be a social major. You can be an art major. It does not matter what your major is. In fact, we actually encourage you to major in something that you're very passionate about, because your GPA is such an important piece for being a competitive applicant. We would rather you major in something that you're going to do well in. However, the expectation is you still have to do the prerequisite courses to go to medical school. So it does make for a little bit of a harder road. However, again, that GPA being so important, it's best to pick something that you really care about. So students are free to major in anything of your choice. And those that are going to, so ultimately, if you're really engaged in your major, you're going to do better. And so we've noticed with some students who insist on being, like say biochem students, which is the path of least resistance to fulfilling prerequisites, they don't necessarily do well in taking all those courses. And because you don't have to take all those courses in order to be going into medical school, it's okay if you decide to deviate from that pathway and pick something that you're going to enjoy, and then kind of sprinkle in those prerequisite courses, which is something we highly encourage. So why medicine? So because it's such a long journey, and because it can be a hard journey, really and ultimately you need to ask yourself why. Why do you want to be in this profession? And of course, we all know that everybody that wants to go into medicine wants to help people, but it has to be bigger than that. So you need to explore what your motivations are to pursue this profession, because it has to be ongoing. You have to kind of continue to motivate yourself, because if you don't, you're gonna lose some steam. So because it's such a long pathway, you want to ask yourself again, why? Why am I doing this? Why making this, putting this extra pressure on myself for this outcome? So also, does it align with your goals and values? So ultimately, is it something you can see yourself doing? So everybody has limitations. And so can you go into a profession that potentially goes against that? So you really want to kind of have those checks and balances and see if that's something you really want to do. What unique characteristics could you contribute to the profession? There's no one right person for medicine per se, but we'd like to see variety. I mean, I'm sure many of you have gone to different doctors and had different experiences, and some are better than others, some have better bedside manners, but ultimately, what is it about you and what can you contribute to the profession that's going to make you the ideal candidate? How can you demonstrate your commitment for and passion for the field? So ways of doing this is going to be extracurricular activities, things that you can do that's going to help add to that commitment and show that you're passionate. So it doesn't have to be necessarily always about medicine. It could be about giving back to the community, leadership opportunities, but ultimately it is showing that you are committed to this pathway to giving back to the community, because that's a lot about what medicine is. Ultimately, those students who can clearly articulate why they are fit for the position will be the most successful. And we say this based on your personal statement. That's super important as part of the application process. But also, if you're lucky enough to get an interview, how are you going to articulate why? Again, you can't just say, I want to help people. It has to be more. And so these extracurricular activities that you're engaging in has to help add to that narrative. So the core competencies. So many health professional schools use holistic views to help, sorry, give me one second, to help define holistic review further. So they have 15 core competencies as a tool to evaluate you in your application. So they're looking at these competencies, but they're looking at their whole student, the whole group. So it's a little bit of everything. So what a competency is, by definition, is an observable behavior that combines knowledge, skills, values, and attitudes related to a specific activity. And as an additional resource down there, there is a link that will that you can click on that will allow you to go to the 15 competencies, but we will be covering them right now. So core competencies for entry medical students. So the pre-professional competencies, so this is obviously before you become a health professional. So service orientation, so I kind of already mentioned this, but ultimately they're looking back, they're looking for who's gonna wanna give back. Because you're gonna be working with the public, you're gonna have to work with people who are very different from yourself. So what kind of service orientation have you been able to show? And so those extracurriculars can definitely benefit you in showing that you're able to do that and that's something you're passionate about. Social skills. So back in 2015, the NCAT, which we'll cover a little bit later, they realized that you can be book smart, but not people smart. So it's really important to understand that you need to be social, you need to be able to work with people, have empathy, things like that. So they wanted more well-rounded students in order to go to medical school. So it wasn't just about the clinical side, it's all about the people side too. I mentioned the cultural competence, and so you will very often work with people from different backgrounds from yourself. So how are you going to show that you can do that? Teamwork. So one thing that I think not everybody recognizes is that a doctor is only as good as the people that surround them. So with being a doctor, you have people who are doing diagnostics for you. So like say you have to have blood work drawn, somebody's doing something with that blood work. Somebody's actually giving you the results of that blood work. So you can't do your job without that proper blood work. Same thing with like a CT scan, X-ray, all of those things are additional people behind the scenes that are helping you be able to do your work. Oral communication, ethical responsibility to self and others. And again, these are all competencies that can be shown by extracurricular activities. Reliability and dependability. So those letter of references come into play very big a bit by being able to show those things. Resilience and adaptability, and I'm sure, especially with COVID now, I think that a lot of us have had to learn how to do this. And it's super important that you show that you can think outside the box and that you can think of new ways of approaching things. And the capacity for improvement. None of us are perfect. So can you show that maybe you had a hiccup or here or there, but have you been able to improve on that? Additional core competencies, so thinking and reasoning competencies, so critical thinking. Can you think outside the box? So we talk about, can you walk and chew gum at the same time, or you can look both ways before you cross the street? I mean, but it's more than that. Can you think outside the box? And again, part of that is actually shown by your grades and your courses, but again, also other things. So maybe you're working as a research assistant. You know, you never know other ways that you can actually prove this. Quantitative reasoning, scientific inquiry, and written communication. And most of these, again, are shown by your grades, but they can be shown also by extracurricular activities and those letters of references that people provide you that are talking about these attributes that you've obtained. And next, I'm going to hand this over to Erica.
Thank you, Jen. So like Jen mentioned, a science major is not required. However, students are expected to have competencies in science competencies. So specifically in living systems, so biological sciences, and then human behavior as well. So some psychology, sociology. Students are expected to have a good understanding of how people are. So how do students develop and demonstrate these core competencies? So we've given you a really high level overview of what these competencies are, and Jen and I both encourage you all to go out to the AAMC website to learn more about them. So students, the work and activities that you're already involved in and your life experience are likely already demonstrating these competencies to some extent. So your job moving forward is to further develop those. Think about which of these areas do you need to maybe enhance or spend a little bit more time on, and maybe which ones you've already got nailed down and maybe you just need to perfect a tiny bit more. So how you go about this is through successful completion of prerequisite courses and mastery of the key concepts. So we'll go over the prerequisite courses that are generally required in just a moment. You can demonstrate these core competencies through a strong score on the MCAT. So an MCAT is generally required for all entering medical students, and we'll talk about the components of the MCAT in a moment as well. And like Jen kind of alluded to a little bit ago, meaningful activities that demonstrate the commitment and passion for the field and the healthcare community in general. Further evidence in the core competencies can be reflected in strong letters of recommendation. And then again, like Jen said, a strong personal narrative reflected in the personal statement, your secondary applications, and in that interview where you really can express your why. Why are you going to be a good physician? Why are you a good fit for the profession? So getting into those prerequisite courses, this is a very general list of the most commonly required prerequisite courses by medical schools. So one of the takeaways today that you're going to hear us say quite a bit is start researching schools and programs now to start familiarizing yourself with the requirements for the medical schools in which you're interested in applying to later on. So even if you're a first or second year student, it is not too late to get started on looking at what those schools require, and so that you can best position yourself. For specific courses at your institution, you'll definitely want to reach out to your pre-health, pre-med advisor. So if you're UC Merced students, Jen and I are available to you, and our website is below there. Fresno State also has a great pre-med advisor as well. And if you are at any other institution and you're not sure where to start, our national organization can help you out too, and that is NAAHP.org. So in general, you're going to need to take 1 year of biology with lab, and that's biology for biology majors, 1 year of general chemistry with lab, 1 year of organic chem with lab, 1 semester of biochemistry, 1 year of physics, 1 year of math, and that can be satisfied with calculus depending on the prerequisite courses of your institution, 1 semester of statistics, 1 year of English, and then 1 semester of psychology. In normal times, you need to get grades for these courses. And the medical schools across the nation recognize the unique situation that we are in right now, with many institutions for kind of requiring students to go take classes on a pass no pass basis, especially in the spring when that movement to remote learning was very rapid. So they understand, and they're making accommodations in most cases. Moving forward, like for this semester, they are tending to be very accommodating, and they recognize that it's going to be a while. We're going to see the ramifications of distance learning and these pass no pass grades for several admission cycles. What we recommend is check the minimum grade requirements by school and by program for the programs you think you're going to apply to see what their guidance says now about pass no pass grades. You definitely want to talk to your pre-health, pre-med advisor before electing pass no pass, just to make sure that that's the right route for you. It may be, but it may not be. If you're on the cusp between an A and a B and you're thinking, oh, I really don't want the B on there, I think I'll just get a P. You want to talk to somebody to see, you know, what would that B do to your GPA? It might help it, in which case a P is not going to help your GPA. So you definitely want to weigh your options, and there's resources on your campuses to check that out. The next piece of demonstrating those competencies is through the admissions exam. So for medical school, it's the MCAT. It contains 4 sections: biological and biochemical foundations of living systems, chemical physical foundations of biological systems, psychological, social, and biological foundations of behavior, and critical analysis and reasoning skills. So what you notice is for those first 3 sections, it almost completely mirrors the prerequisite classes that we just discussed. So you definitely want to make sure that you are taking the appropriate classes, not just to meet the prerequisites for admission, but also to prepare for the MCAT. The critical analysis and reasoning skills portion is more like the English section of the SAT. So that you really, again, want to make sure that you're staying up on reading. Reading for fun is a great way to prepare for that section of the exam as well. The scoring ranges, it's a low of 118 with a high of 132 on each of the 4 sections with a midpoint of 125. Under normal circumstances, the exam time is about 6 hours start to finish, and it is on computer. Because of the pandemic, the AAMC and the MCAT folks have made some adjustments to the testing environment. We highly encourage students who are near ready to take the exam, like you're looking at maybe taking it in January, definitely start looking now if you haven't already. Look at the MCAT website, and we've provided that link here below. Things are changing very rapidly. They have condensed the test taking day, so the time you aren't in front of the computer for a whole 6 hours. It's still very long, but they have made some modifications given the pandemic. So if you're getting ready to apply in the next cycle, looking at taking the exam soon, please stay on top of the MCAT changes if there are any, or what accommodations and adjustments they might be making in the near future. Next up is experience. So Jen kind of already alluded to this, and I just want to expand upon it a bit more. Experience in the field is really important. Medical schools want to take on students who have a clear understanding of what the profession is and what they're getting themselves into. And the best way to know that is by having some hands-on experience in the field. So that can help you find out what the career is all about. I've had students tell me some interesting things over the years when I ask them why they want to be a physician, and they'll say, oh, I want to be like House and solve problems. So medical school and working in a hospital in a clinical setting is not like on TV. You want to have a clear understanding of what it's really like. Definitely we want to start thinking about those areas that you're especially passionate about and find ways to engage. Through that experience, it can help you clarify and validate your initial impressions. Is it really what you thought it was going to be? Test your level of commitment and enhance your motivation. Most times students have these like aha moments where it's like, yes, this interaction with this patient is definitely the reason why I want to be a physician and what's going to keep me going for the next 3 or 4 years. So those aha moments can be the kernel of the personal statement too. It can help you improve the articulation of your goals. So when you have that aha moment, write it down. I recommend students, keep a journal when you're in those internships or experiences so that when you have those moments, write it down while it's fresh in your head and so that you can draw upon it later on when you're getting ready to write the personal statement or the secondary applications. Some programs have very specific requirements for experience. So again, this is where you want to go back to the medical school websites and check to see what do they want. So that you can make sure that you're meeting those expectations before you apply. And then finally, never choose an experience just to get in. The classes that you have to take are very demanding and challenging, and then we're telling you need to get out there and learn more about the field in a hands-on way. We want you to engage in experiences that are meaningful and exciting to you. So don't feel like you have to, oh, I have to go do this thing to check the box. That's the opposite of why you should be going out and seeking experiences like this. We really want you to think carefully about what you're interested in, what you're excited about. Is there a particular population or healthcare challenge or problem that really motivates you to pursue this pathway? start thinking about how you could get involved in that space. We want you to get something that's important to you, because you're going to get a lot more out of it. And again, when it comes down to the personal statement and the secondaries and the interviews, you're going to have much more to talk about. And the medical school admissions committees can tell when a student is really engaged and invested in an experience versus somebody who just did it because they felt they had to. Ultimately, from your experience, you should be able to get really good letters of recommendation. So the folks that have seen you in your experience, your internship, where it's volunteering, clinical shadowing, or whatever, they want the admissions committees want to hear from those folks. Recommendations should also come from professors, research supervisors, so somebody who knows you and your academic work well. It's really important and helpful if your recommenders can include valuable pieces of information that are not necessarily on your academic transcripts, like your academic ability, personality traits, knowledge and suitability for the intended profession, and then your overall potential. If you go to a faculty member and ask them for a letter, and they only can talk about how you did in their class, that's not adding anything more to your application. It can actually take away from it. So you definitely want to make sure that you're engaging with people like professors, again, the research supervisors or the internship experience type supervisors, so that you can stay in contact with them and so that they can provide you a letter when you're ready. Again, this is another point where you want to check with the schools and programs to which you may apply to ensure that you're getting the right number of recommendations, as well as recommendations from the right people. Some schools are specific and will want very specific letters from like science faculty or non-science faculty or what have you. So again, this is another space where you definitely want to do your homework. So we've talked about all of the components of the application, and this illustration shows how it all comes together with the actual application process. So it starts in January of every year. That's where you really want to start with gathering information. So starting to prepare that personal statement, going back to your journal and gleaning through your experiences and those really important moments where you were convinced that this is why you want to be a physician and this is something that you can point to tangibly. Start preparing that personal statement, and you'll want to go through several drafts. Get some people to look at it, like a pre-med, pre-health advisor. Check with your career center for support as well, a writing instructor that you've had that can give you some feedback on where to strengthen it. You want to have your test scores handy or be signed up for an exam. You don't have to have your scores by the time you submit the application, but at minimum, you need to be signed up for an MCAT session. And then unofficial transcripts for your academic history. The primary application, which is our next arrow here, you have to enter in your entire academic history from college. So if you went to community college, even for a summer class, you have to report that. If you took community college courses in high school, you need to report those as well. So anything higher ed, so community college, taken at Fresno State, UC Merced, or any other institution, you need to report all of it. So it's handy to have your unofficial transcripts there so that you can enter that data accurately. And then finally, finalize that personal statement, and then the applications will open in May, and then the earliest you can submit is end of May, early June. So they have deadlines in October, but we do not recommend waiting until that deadline day. Many of the medical schools practice rolling admissions, which means that they start reviewing applications as soon as they have any in their queue to start reviewing. So if you wait until October to submit, you're going to be competing with a lot more students for fewer seats, as many medical schools have already started offering seats in their medical school and in their medical class to other applicants. So statistically, you want to apply as early as possible. But again, you want to take the time to do your application well. The next stop is secondary application. So those typically you'll get those by invitation. So let me step back. The primary application, there's one application. So allopathic schools, it's the AMCAS. For osteopathic schools, it's the AAAMC. And so you do the one application, and then that's forwarded out to the various medical schools that you've selected. at the point of the secondary application, that's where you're communicating directly with the individual medical schools, and their secondary applications can vary. This is typically the call for your letters of evaluation or your letters of recommendation, and then many of them have supplemental questions. And sometimes this is where it gets into the nitty-gritty about why are you a good fit for the UCSF School of Medicine? And that's where you make a case for, you've done your homework and you know about the UCSF School of Medicine mission, and this is how you are a good fit. That's just one example. So secondaries can roll out as early as July, as late as November. That is what I've seen. But again, these are guidelines. Medical school admissions committees can move a little faster. They might move a little bit slower. After the secondary application is the interview. So if you can get to the interview, you're in a good position. That means they like what they've seen on paper and they want to meet you in real life. The earliest I've seen a student get an offer for an interview is August, and as late as March. So again, there's a lot of time there. It all depends on the individual admissions committee. So the interview day can take a couple different forms. Again, this is another space where you want to do your research so you kind of know what you're heading into. So many schools are doing a mini multiple interview format, which I kind of equate to speed dating. When you get to the interview point, again, you'll want to look up what this is. It's something you can sort of prepare for in terms of you can prepare for the format, but like the SAT, it's not something you can really study for. Many schools still use traditional group and or individual interview formats with faculty and current students. And so meeting with the current medical students is really great because then you can ask them questions about what is it like at that medical school so that you can get a sense of, is this a good fit for me to come to this medical school? And then typically includes a campus tour so you can check out the facilities and again, ask questions. It's really about making that match and finding a fit. They're interested in you, and this is your opportunity to see if they're going to be a good space for you to flourish in. And then finally, there's notifications. I've had students be admitted as early as December and as late as May. Again, wide range of time. So at the notification point, you could be accepted, denied, or waitlisted. And the one thing with the wait list is it is a little more anxiety provoking, is it is more waiting. Depending on where you are on the wait list, you may get in. I've heard a story from a student who was on her way to one medical school, like in the car driving, moving there, and got a call from another medical school that was her top choice, and she turned the car around and drove back home so that she could go to the other medical school. And so you can see how long it can last. And then finally is matriculation. So students accept and deny or decline the offers, and then finally enroll. Typically, most medical schools will start July, August. Some might start as early as May. It depends a lot. So again, we really stress the importance of doing some research on your own so that you're really clear and you understand some of the practices of the medical schools and programs to which you intend to apply. So what can you do now? First and foremost, do well in your courses. The science courses are highly sequential and the concepts build on themselves. So if you're in like introductory or general chemistry this semester, when you get to organic, it all just piles up. So you want to make sure that you're mastering those key concepts in every science class, every step of the way. We highly recommend students to take advantage of the free tutoring services available on your campus. Even in a remote environment, the tutoring centers are available. You just have to kind of seek them out and get onto their Zoom links. Everything is on Zoom now. So you see Merced students, there's the Chem Center, the Math Center, the STEM Resource Center, and PALS, and the Writing Center. So there's a lot of different ways to get assistance. Like I've mentioned on each slide, research those medical schools. Now is the time to start looking. Check out that mission statement. See what kind of, what is their focus? What kind of students are they looking to attract? What kind of physician are they looking to produce? Look at their acceptance data. Many of them will publish the MCAT and GPA ranges of their admitted and matriculated students. So that gives you kind of a range to shoot for. Check out those requirements. Make sure that you're hitting all of those course requirements so that you're not rejected because you're missing a course. And then start following them on social media. That's another great way to get engaged. Excuse me. And then gain some experience in your intended field. Like I mentioned a little bit ago, the medical schools want to take on students who have a clear understanding of what it's like to be a physician. If you're not sure where to start with your campus career or involvement center. They'll have connections in the community, and even in our remote environment, they can still help you kind of in your search. You want to meet with advisors regularly, like your pre-health advisor, your major advisor. If peer advisors are available on your campus, seek out some help. Get involved. Clubs and organizations are another great space to meet like-minded students, make connections. At UC Merced, we have a number of pre-health focused clubs, and they bring in different guest speakers, professionals. Many of them work out campus tours or field trips in normal times. So again, it's another space where you can connect with others who are interested in the same things as you. Cultivate relationships with faculty. When I went over the letters of reference, you definitely want to make sure that you have connections with faculty so that they can provide those strong letters. An easy way to do that is go to office hours. Even if you don't feel like you're struggling in a course, going and talking to the faculty members, asking them questions can really help. And in a digital environment too, if they can see you one-on-one with your name, that can really make a difference. And then finally, think about a parallel plan. Are there other careers that interest you? That's totally fine to be interested in a number of different careers and professions. Now's the time to explore. And you can actually take a lot of what I've said and apply it to a bunch of other careers and professions. So that is the end of our slides. My contact information is right there, erobbins2@ucmerced.edu. Jen can be reached at jsouza5. And then we have additional handouts, including all the course lists and other information out at prehealth.ucmerced.edu.
Great, so we are waiting for some chat questions. So if, thank you. I'm just trying to see the chat box. If you guys would like to ask a question to our presenters, please take some time to write them in the chat box and then I can go ahead and read them. Someone said, seniors need to apply as soon as possible to get in for medical school. I believe that was a statement.
I think I know where they were going with that. Let me backtrack a tiny bit to the application process slide. So what I think that question was heading to, I say traditional, typical pathway to medical school is, yes, students applying in their junior year, at the end of the junior year, so they start right after they've graduated. So no gap years. That is something that we're seeing less and less of, at least with UC Merced students. We're seeing more and more students taking advantage of gap years. And so this timeline is what it is. So it's the application process is about a year in length, but medical school isn't going anywhere. And so we encourage students to really be thoughtful and apply when they have the most competitive application they possibly can produce and put together before they apply. So in thinking about your own pathway, yes, it's about a year. You have to apply a year and a half-ish in advance from when you want to go.
Awesome. Great. So we have another question. It says, is it a bad idea to submit an application prior to taking the MCAT?
So it's not a bad idea. And we have students do it all the time. Hopefully you've taken some practice exams, and so you have a kind of a good idea on where you might be scoring, so it's not a complete surprise. But it is absolutely fine to submit that application before your MCAT score is ready. Again, in non-pandemic times, the medical school servicers wouldn't forward out your application until the MCAT score is received. That is not happening, at least in the current cycle, but what will happen next cycle, I can't say for sure. So you still got to plan to do that MCAT pretty close to the time that you submit the application, but it doesn't have to be, you don't have to have the scores when you apply, but we recommend that you have it pretty close. So like a July, August exam at the latest.
Great. And the next question is, will it hurt an applicant's chances to take the MCAT more than once?
Good question. We try to highly recommend that a student be as fully prepared as possible to take the MCAT. However, it is not necessarily uncommon. However, it is not great if you do worse the second time around. So you want to see an improvement on the MCAT score. So because the MCAT is super important, we can't stress enough being as fully prepared as possible. Don't just take it just because I'm going to take it, I'm ready. Make sure you've studied really thoroughly first. Because if then you take it and you're not quite happy with your score, but then you take it again and see it's lower, then that's not going to look as good. So it's okay to take it more than once, but you want to see an improvement. Let's just put it that way.
Great. And then just to answer the question about access to recording of this presentation, all participants will receive a recording of the conference and how to access those. So please look out for that email. The next question I have is, if I took psychology courses at a community college in high school, should I still take psychology at my four-year undergraduate institution in order to meet the psych requirement for some medical schools?
You might not need to take additional psych classes. I would recommend getting in touch with an academic advisor or a pre-med, pre-health advisor to have a look at what you've done at the community college, what transfers, and kind of have a conversation. You might not need to.
And just to clarify too, medical schools will accept community college courses to fulfill prerequisites. So it doesn't have to be done at a four-year institution with the exception of biochemistry. Everything else can actually be done at a four-year institution, but she's right. You just want to make sure that it's the right type of course.
Great. So the next question is, any amount of work experience or clinical hours needed in order to be admitted to medical school?
So they don't necessarily give you a number. It is really about depth and breadth. So generally speaking, again, you want to be engaged in something that's meaningful and you want to do it for a while before you apply. There is no magic amount of time. There's no magic number. It really is subjective and personal, and we want students to be engaged enough to where they have a clear understanding of what the profession is and they can clearly articulate why they're a good fit for it. Starting something in April and then applying in June is probably not sufficient, but again, it's a conversation to have with your advisor too.
And we really stress quality versus quantity when it comes to it. I mean, obviously you want to show that you're committed to something, but if you're referring to like the hours that are needed for like PA school or even PT school, it's not the same. There's no magic number when it comes to medical school, and very rarely are you going to find a medical school that's going to require a specific number of hours.
Great. The next question is, how should a non-traditional student approach applying to medical school? And some background is 38, graduated in 2005, firefighter, and has been a paramedic for 8 years.
Oh, wow.
So my first question would be what your major was, first and foremost. The reason I bring that up is because I was going to bring up the career changer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there's two kinds of postbac programs, which you're not very familiar with it. Postbac programs are there for students to try to get a competitive edge. So there's one that's for GPA boosting, and then there's one for students that didn't actually major in any of the sciences. So a firefighter, like if you've got a bachelor's degree, you can go into a postbac program and actually learn the skills that you need and the competencies that we talk about when it comes to your grades that can be learned in a postbac program.
I would also encourage that student to reach back to their undergraduate institution to see if there's a pre-med advisor. Generally, in our profession, we will work with alumni. And so UC Merced opened in 2005, so I'm pretty sure you're not a UCM alum, but that's okay. I know Fresno State has one. And so again, I would recommend reaching back to your undergraduate institution for some additional support. And like Jen said, they can look at your academic history and see if a postbac is needed or not, or if you just need 1 or 2 classes.
Awesome. Can a high MCAT score cancel out other deficiencies in your application?
It can help kind of even out for a lower GPA. But again, the experience and the personal characteristics, those competencies are really important. So it can help, because it demonstrates the academic ability that might not be reflected in the GPA.
So the next question is, what is a good number of hours to shoot for with volunteer, shadowing, clinical experience?
So we kind of already mentioned that there's no specific numbers, but it really, again, it tends to be about quality and about what you're getting from the experience itself, because it's incredibly important for that narrative to be advanced with every extracurricular activity you engage in. So you can definitely tell the difference between somebody who's done something that's really they're passionate about versus somebody who's just kind of motivated it. So it's not about, oh, I did, 400 hours of this. It's like, okay, well, it's not so much about the hours, it's about what did you learn from those hours? What is it that you engaged in that helped you decide that, yes, this is the continued pathway that I want? So it's super important just to kind of engage in those activities that are meaningful to you, that are going to add to that there, because they're going to ask about it. And again, it doesn't come down to, it's not about quantity, it's really about that quality piece. So you don't necessarily want to bounce around from activity to activity to activity, but if you can get a good 2 or 3 really good activities and be very much invest in them, that's going to make the difference.
Great. And our next question is it unfavorable to take community classes as a postbac after graduating from a 4-year university, or is it a formal postbac program better?
I would say it depends on your circumstances. It is perfectly fine, and we've heard this time and time again from medical admissions committee folks, that community college credits are perfectly acceptable. And like Jen said, biochemistry is the one class that's taught at upper division that you would need to take in a 4-year. But whether or not a post-bac program, like a formal structured program or even a special master's, is the right thing for you, it really depends on you and what your situation is and where does your application, like we look at the application holistically. So where does your application need improvement? If it's just grades and you have a lot of really rich experience, then, or if you're just missing classes, maybe community college is okay. And I'm sorry, there's an ice cream man going down my street.
It's all good. All right, so next question is, what's a good GPA to get in medical school?
So this is going to vary from school to school. So Erica really stressed this, and honestly, I do the same thing. Research is going to be one of your best friends when it comes to being a competitive applicant, because every school is very different. And so one of the things that Erica mentioned earlier was doing the research on the statistics and things like that. So because most schools are pretty transparent about their entrance students and about what their average GPA was, MCAT scores. And so there's no necessarily one right GPA, but if I had to like post a number, I'd say at least a 3.5 and above. Again, that's, again, comparable between schools. And it depends on the how competitive the school is. Obviously, if you want to go to Stanford, one of the Ivy Leagues, is going to be pretty high up there. But one of the UCs, like UC Davis, for instance, it might be lower, it might be 3.5. So again, it really comes down to where you're at, and that's where the postbacs can come in and things like that to be beneficial. Another thing to be aware of, and not just about GPA, but also if you're looking outside of California to go to medical school, you also want to look at the statistics of how many students they admit out of state, because you might find that like a certain school will only admit like 1% out of state students. And because it's so expensive to apply to medical school, you really want to make sure you're putting your money and your application somewhere that you feel like you have a good competitive edge.
Great. And our next question is, are there any good resources to use when researching medical schools?
Yes. So you can get a lot just off of the different medical school admissions websites, and those are free. anyone can see that. You just need to spend some time looking at the internet. So not too bad. Another resource we really recommend is the MSAR, which is Medical School Admissions Requirements, and that is put out by the AAMC. So you know it's legitimate. And that's for allopathic medical schools. If you're interested in osteopathic medical schools, there's the college information book, and that is also available on the AACOM website. And so the MSAR you do have to pay for. We also really recommend students to look into the Financial Assistance Program, or the FAP, the FAP. That is an opportunity, again, put on by the AAMC so that qualified students can get reduced fees for the MCAT, reduced application fees, and then access to the MSAR and other MCAT and other resources are available for free. So check that out. Again, it's like the first thing that comes up if you Google AAMC MSAR, and that's a really reputable source of information. And then check out the fee assistance program, and it's renewable. Yeah.
Awesome. The next question is, realistically, are medical schools more likely to accept a student who graduated from a UCU rather than a state school? So do undergrad schools really matter?
We get this question a lot, and my Erica's experience is a lot more broad than mine, but even just in my experience, it's not so much about where you went to school, it's about what you did in school and about your extracurriculars and MCAT score. So, because we get students asking that all the time about, should we come to UC Merced because we have a better chance of getting into a medical school? And a lot of people bank on trying to attend a school that has a medical school affiliated, but it's not a guarantee. It doesn't necessarily give you a boost to go to UC Davis as an undergrad just to get into UC Davis medical school. Again, it comes down to, what's your GPA like? How did you do well in your classes? What kind of engaging extracurricular activities did you do? And that MCAT. That's ultimately what they're looking at. Not so much about what you did there as opposed to where you went.
Awesome. Next question is, are medical schools taken into account the limited research, shadowing, and internship opportunities in the era of COVID?
Yes, they are living in the same world we are and are absolutely making accommodations. And so again, that's why we were really stressing, look at the different schools and programs. The medical schools recognize that the situation that we're in today is going to have reverberating effects in application cycles to come. And so they understand. We also have a list on our page, so prehealth.ucmerced.edu/pandemic. Our national organization has kind of crowdsourced from advisors all over the country on different ideas and ways that pre-health students can continue to stay engaged in a socially distant, safe way during this crisis. And so it may not be direct patient care or clinical internships, but there's still some other ways to kind of still keep your head in the game and stay focused and engaged in the long run. But again, check those medical school websites. They're going to have lots of information as this goes on as well.
Yeah, and it seems like that was our last question, other than our, we just had somebody comment to follow up on the question she just asked. Many pre-medical students are limited to pursuing these research internship opportunities due to remote instructions. And the next question that just popped in here is, in the event of life issues that come up after being accepted into medical school, do they offer deferment into the next class?
They might. So again, that's something that if you're in that situation, you want to get into contact with the medical school as soon as possible to see what options are available. I know of students and friends of mine who have taken a leave of absence in the middle of medical school to do different things because of life situations. And so you really just want to make sure that you're staying in close contact with the medical school and letting them know what's going on in your life.
Great. It's another question popped in here. In regards to getting residency positions, now that the residencies are combined for MD and DO students, is an MD degree preferred over a DO degree?
Ooh, that is a very good question. We usually don't get super specific like that. So wow. It's my understanding that no, once, that they're combined now. And so it's really a student preference in terms of which type of training is going to be best for them. We recommend all students interested in medicine to look into both allopathic and osteopathic. And we didn't go into the details in this presentation today, but we really recommend students to go out and do some time thinking about, again, why medicine, and look at the different approaches and see which one is a good fit for them.
Awesome. Anybody else have any more questions? I believe we have a couple of more minutes. Feel free to use the chat box.
That's a good question, then.
Very good. Wow.
A lot of questions.
And just to kind of like piggyback on what Erica said, they're really trying to, instead of having it be DO versus MD so much anymore, that's why they actually have combined the application process to try to make it so it's not so differentiated, because they are still doctors. And a lot of it's going to also do with getting residencies and things like that. A lot of it's going to have to do with the schools you're attending and their programs and where you're headed.
So I just threw up our last slide there in case anybody wants to grab our contact info or our website.
And if you were, and also to mention about, we know that in COVID times it's a lot more difficult to get extracurricular activities, and we've had lots of students that have come to us because they're worried. One of the things that the medical schools have mentioned is trying to find, like, not just the stuff that they've suggested, but trying to find other ways to think outside the box of gaining extracurricular activities. So some of the things that they've mentioned was, for instance, contact tracing with COVID. And then I even had suggested that, it's like a lot of it has to do with giving back to the community. So volunteering at, homeless shelters or food banks or things that it's about, because it comes down to about community and involvement. So what are some things that you can do? Because it's true, it doesn't necessarily have to be medically related. We highly encourage you to expose yourself to medical profession as much as possible, but it doesn't have to be 100% full encompassing regarding to medical.
Especially now.
Yeah.
Awesome. We just had one more question pop in. Can professional healthcare experience be used instead of physicians shadowing hours?
I think it would depend on what kind of experience it is.
If you're talking about like EMT or things like that, those are definitely acceptable. The more contact you have with patient care is helpful. But yeah, I think it depends on what kind of job you're doing. That would be acceptable.
Awesome. Well, thank you both, Erica and Jen, for giving us all that great information, giving everyone a lot to think about as we close our first day of the Road Conference. And so I just want to thank all of our attendees for attending our first day of the Road Conference. Day 2 will begin tomorrow at 9 a.m. So bring your coffee and be ready for another day of great information and learning. And so you can get your web link. It's the same one that you used to get in today to get into tomorrow to access all the different workshops. And so with that, we will close our night, and we will see you tomorrow, and have a safe evening and good sleep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Erica and Jen.
Thank you.
Thank you.